So, for today, let's finish with the fourth idea that I want to present, and that is the idea of the regulatory subsystems that Kenneth Meyer wrote about. The Meyer piece actually is really good at describing a lot of the evolution of these coalition ideas. So it does talk a little bit about this movement from the Iron Triangle to the issue networks, but that he thinks that for regulatory policy, you need an even more descriptive pattern model to look at. And so let's talk a little bit about a couple of the things he talks about in the introduction to this piece. This obviously is an excerpt from a book. And so at the very beginning of the excerpt, he tries to give you a little bit of a picture of the things that he's focused on in the book as a whole. And so I thought I might just kind of reiterate some of the points he makes about the influences that regulatory agencies have to deal with. What is their situation? Think about if you were the head of a regulatory agency or program director for a regulatory agency, what would be the pressures that you're feeling that would affect you as you sat at a table talking about policy ideas and proposals? And what he says is that there was one school of thought who argued that there was such discretion granted to these regulatory agencies that they really were in the driver's seat to make policy, and that it was their professional values. The values of an agency are often determined by the primary profession that they're recruiting. So if you're looking at the U.S. Forest Service, those people have all come out of U.S. forestry programs, have a similar educational background, have similar interests in U.S. forests, and have quite a bit of commonality. On the other hand, there are some other agencies that don't have such a professional value dominance. So you would need to assess that likelihood of, is there a professional agency value system that is driving some of the policy making? Those that believe that discretion is a large part of what's happening in regulatory policy and that agencies are in the driver's seat also talk about the advantage that the agencies have in terms of their professional expertise. And that is pretty obvious. Who has the most information about the policy arena? Typically it is these professional bureaucrats who are not political appointments, who've been in the agency for decades. They know the policy background, both in terms of its expertise dimensions, but also in terms of just knowing who are all the actors that have been influential in the policy area before. They also talk about the importance of bureaucratic entrepreneurs. We've talked about policy entrepreneurs in the Kingdon piece, but here they are focusing on the fact that frequently the entrepreneur is the program bureaucrat from the agency. And then finally, they talk about how the structure of the agency is also very important in terms of how much power the agency has. So what are their regulatory authorities? How are they structured? That makes a huge difference in how powerful the agency will be even given this discretion. Now, Meyer then argues there's another perspective that's been prevalent in regulatory policy making work, and that is that while in the initial period of creating regulatory agencies, the thought was we were primarily trying to come up with a way to protect the public interest, to produce more fairness in the system, and to try to distance policy making that was regulatory in nature from partisan politics in Congress. Therefore, we created these independent regulatory agencies that are the primary structure in regulatory politics. In terms of this sort of portrayal, that you're looking at how the agency has been constrained then in the end by all of these influences that they have to work with. The entrepreneur, the bureaucratic entrepreneur, is not someone who just has power. They have to get agreement from all of those that have influence over it, all of those that they work with regularly. And so they give quite a bit of this model gives more attention to the interest groups that are working with the agency, the fact that the agency continues to work with the legislative committees. They look at the possibility of having external economic shocks, witnessed today, and certainly also are interested in how technological change has affected the agency, saying that the agency is more affected by its environment than maybe the prior scholars had thought. Some of you have read Selznick and Bennis in Public Administration, and I think about those two authors when I was reading about this section in Meyer. He does raise the concept of regulatory capture. Regulatory capture is an important idea. It says that over time, a regulatory agency will be captured by the regulatory interests that are the agency's focal attention. So unlike being regulated in the public interest, what often happens is that the regulatory agency ultimately becomes an advocate for that interest that you were originally trying to regulate. I'll continue in another video.